I raised her for 25 years. I taught her to swim, to mend nets, to read the tide. I buried her father's memory in my chest so she'd never have to carry it. Then one evening, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're not my real family, Frank. Mom told me everything. She didn't know her mother had told her nothing but lies." 6 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. A voice I barely recognized. Sharp and frantic. "The rent didn't go through. What happened?" I paused and said, "Didn't you already tell me who your real family was?" That was the day my daughter discovered that family has a cost, and I was done covering it. Thank you for being here with me. Before we continue, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and it truly means more than you know. And one small note before we go on. Some details in this story have been fictionalized for entertainment and educational purposes. But the lessons it carries about love, loyalty, and the cost of the choices we make are very real. Let me take you back to the beginning. I woke up that Saturday morning in early March the way I always did, before the sun, before the gulls, before the harbor horns started calling the boats out. My bedroom window faced east, toward the Atlantic, and the first thing I saw was the gray line of the ocean pressing against the sky. Gloucester, Massachusetts. I'd lived here my whole life. 63 years of salt air and wooden hulls and tides that never asked permission. I showered, trimmed my beard, and stood in front of the closet trying to decide what to wear. Which sounds ridiculous for a man who spends most days covered in sawdust and marine varnish. But this wasn't a work day. My daughter Sophie had called 2 weeks ago and mentioned her kitchen faucet was leaking again. I'd told her I'd come by Saturday to fix it. That's what I did. She called. I showed up. 25 years of showing up. I pulled on a flannel shirt, the dark green one she'd bought me 3 Christmases ago, and a pair of clean jeans. I grabbed my toolbox from the garage, the old steel one with my initials scratched into the lid. F.C. Frank Callahan. That toolbox had been with me longer than most people. I'd rebuilt boat engines with it, fixed school science projects, assembled a crib the night before Sophie came home for the first time. She was 3 years old and terrified. I remember her tiny hand gripping mine so hard it left marks. I loaded the toolbox into my truck and headed down toward the harbor. Gloucester in March is a quiet town. The tourist season was still months away. The fishing boats sat low in the water along the wharves, their hulls slick with morning dew. I passed Rocky Neck, where the art galleries were still shuttered for winter. I passed the Gloucester House, where Eddie and I used to eat fried clams on Friday nights. I hadn't been inside since he died. Eddie Morgan, my best friend, Sophie's father. 25 years gone, and his name still caught in my throat like a fishbone. I turned onto Commercial Street and followed the road past the old fish processing plants toward Sophie's apartment building. It was a converted warehouse near the harbor, red brick and tall windows, the kind of place that used to smell like cod and now smelled like fresh paint and young ambition. I'd co-signed the lease 4 years ago when she'd finished her veterinary degree and gotten a job at the Cape Ann Marine Animal Center. I'd also paid the security deposit, the first 3 months' rent, and the moving truck. I parked outside and grabbed the toolbox. The morning air was sharp, that particular New England cold that cuts straight through flannel and settles in your knuckles. I could hear the harbor behind me, the gentle knock of boats against the dock, the distant cry of gulls circling the fish pier. A jogger passed on the sidewalk, breath clouding in the cold. Normal Saturday morning. Nothing about it warned me. I climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on her door. Apartment 312. I'd knocked on this door maybe 200 times in 4 years. Dropping off groceries, fixing a shelf, bringing soup when she had the flu. I knew the sound my knuckles made against that wood better than I knew most things. Footsteps inside. Then the lock turned, and the door opened. Sophie stood there in a sweatshirt and pajama pants, her dark hair loose and tangled around her shoulders. She looked tired. Not just sleepy tired, but deep tired. The kind that comes from something heavier than a bad night's rest. Her eyes were puffy and red. She blinked at me like she wasn't sure I was real. "Morning, sweetheart," I said, holding up the toolbox. "Here to fix that faucet." Brought the good wrench this time. She didn't smile. She didn't step aside. She just stood there, one hand on the door, blocking the entrance. "Frank." Not Dad. "Frank, what are you doing here?" Something shifted in my chest. She hadn't called me Frank since she was 5 years old, and still learning whether I was going to stay. Once she decided I was, it was always Dad. Always. "You called about the faucet," I said carefully. 2 weeks ago. You said Saturday." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she glanced over her shoulder into the apartment. Something in that glance, the quickness of it, the nervousness, made me look past her. A woman sat on the couch in Sophie's living room. I could see her through the gap in the doorway. Mid-50s, dark hair with streaks of gray, thin face, sharp cheekbones. She wore a cream-colored blouse and sat with her legs crossed and her hands folded in her lap like she was posing for a photograph, like she belonged there. I didn't recognize her at first. 25 years is a long time. People change. Faces soften, harden, rearrange themselves. But then she turned her head and looked directly at me, and something deep in my memory cracked open like ice in spring. Those eyes, dark brown, almost black, with a sharpness that could cut glass. I'd seen those eyes once before, 25 years ago, in the rearview mirror of a sedan pulling out of my driveway, while a 5-year-old girl stood on the porch and asked me where her mommy was going. "Sophie," I said slowly. "Who is that?" Sophie's hand tightened on the door. Her chin lifted, but her lip trembled. "This is Rachel," she said. "My mother." The toolbox in my hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Rachel Morgan, the woman who gave birth to Sophie, who left her at 5 years old, who drove away without looking back and never called, never wrote, never sent so much as a birthday card in 25 years. She was sitting on my daughter's couch like she'd never left. Rachel stood up from the couch. She moved slowly, deliberately, the way someone moves when they want you to notice every inch of their composure. She was thinner than I remembered, and the years had sharpened her features into something angular and precise. But she held herself like a woman who had practiced being looked at. "It's been a long time, Frank," she said. Her voice was the same. 25 years, and her voice hadn't changed. Smooth, measured, the kind of voice that could tell you the sky was green and make you look up to check. I didn't move from the doorway. The toolbox hung at my side like an anchor. "She reached out to me in January," Sophie said quietly, her arms crossed. "She found me through social media. She wanted to reconnect. January. 2 months ago. 2 months of phone calls and visits happening behind my back, and Sophie hadn't said a word. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I knew you'd react like this." "Like what?" "I haven't reacted at all. You're doing that thing," she said. "That thing where you go quiet and your jaw gets tight and you look like you're holding back a storm." She was right. I was holding back a storm, but I wasn't going to let it break in front of Rachel Morgan. "Sophie, can we talk? Just us." Rachel's voice cut in. "Frank, I understand this is a surprise. I've been going to therapy. I've done the work. I just want a chance to know my daughter. My daughter." The words landed like a slap, as if 25 years of absence could be erased by a few therapy sessions and a Facebook message. I looked at Sophie. "Is this what you want?" "Yes," she said. No hesitation. "Okay." I set the toolbox down inside the doorway. "I'll fix the faucet another time." I turned to leave. And that's when Sophie said it. "Frank." I stopped. "Mom told me everything." I turned back. "Everything about what?" Rachel stood behind Sophie, one hand resting on her shoulder. That hand. Manicured nails. Silver rings. A hand that had never braided Sophie's hair, never held a thermometer to her forehead, never gripped the back of a bicycle seat while a little girl learned to balance. She told me why you really took me in, Sophie said. Why you really stayed. And why was that? Because you felt guilty. Her voice cracked. About Dad. About the night he died. She said you couldn't save him. So you took me in to make yourself feel better, like I was some kind of redemption project. The words hit me in the chest. Not because they were true, but because they were close enough to the truth to draw blood. I did carry guilt about Eddie. Every day. The weight of his hand slipping out of mine in that black water, the sound of the wave that took him, the silence after. 25 years of carrying that. But that wasn't why I'd raised Sophie. Is that what you believe? I asked. Sophie looked at me with Eddie's eyes, and I could see the war behind them. The girl who used to call me Dad fighting against whatever Rachel had been planting for 2 months. You're not my real family, Frank. She said it quietly, like she was testing how the words sounded out loud. I think I need to figure some things out. I stood there for a long moment. The hallway was silent, except for the distant harbor. Boats creaking, water lapping at pilings. Okay, I said. I didn't argue. I didn't list the 25 years of evidence that contradicted every word Rachel had whispered. You can't fight a war that someone else started inside your child's head. Not with words. Not with the enemy standing right there with her hand on your daughter's shoulder. I turned and walked toward the stairs. Behind me, Rachel's voice. Low. Almost a whisper. But the hallway carried it clearly. See? He can't even look at you. That's guilt, baby. Not love. I kept walking. Down the stairs. Out the front door into the cold March air. A lobster boat was pulling away from the dock, engine chugging low and steady. I watched it go, and thought about how easy it would be to just keep walking. Past the harbor, down to the water's edge, into the Atlantic, until Gloucester was just a dot behind me. I got in my truck instead. I sat there for 15 minutes staring at Sophie's building. The toolbox was still up there. 25 years of fixing things. And I'd left my tools behind. The house was quiet when I got home. It was always quiet now. I walked past the kitchen table where she used to do homework while I cooked dinner. Past the photographs I couldn't look at. Past everything that proved Rachel wrong. I went to my study at the back of the house. A small room. Barely big enough for a desk. A filing cabinet. And a bookshelf of maritime manuals. The window faced the ocean. On clear nights, you could see the beam of Eastern Point Lighthouse sweeping across the water. I sat in the dark. I didn't turn on the light. Just listened to the ocean breathe through the walls. The same sound from the night Eddie died. The same sound from the morning Rachel drove away and left a 5-year-old on my porch asking where her mommy was going. You're not my real family, Frank. Real family. As if realness came from blood. As if 25 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and midnight phone calls could be undone by a woman with a practiced smile and a convenient story. Mom told me everything. No, she didn't. She told you what she wanted you to believe. And the real truth was sitting in a box I hadn't opened in 25 years. I walked to the closet and pulled down the oak box from the top shelf. I'd built it myself from salvaged white oak off a boat I'd restored. Sophie's initials carved into the lid. S. C. Sophie Callahan. The name she chose. The name I gave her. I set it on the desk. Lifted the lid. And 25 years looked back at me. The first thing I touched was a photograph. Faded at the edges, slightly curled from years of being pressed against other memories. Sophie at 5 years old, standing on Good Harbor Beach with the Atlantic behind her. She was barefoot. Her jeans rolled up to her knees, squinting into the sun with a grin so wide, it took up half her face. My shadow stretched across the sand beside her. That picture was taken 3 weeks after Rachel left. Sophie hadn't smiled once in those 21 days. She barely spoke. She'd sit on the porch steps every afternoon, staring down the driveway like she was waiting for headlights that never came. She stopped eating breakfast. Her kindergarten teacher called me twice to say Sophie had been crying during recess, sitting alone on the swings with her arms wrapped around the chains. I didn't know what to do. I was 38 years old, a boat mechanic who'd never changed a diaper, never packed a school lunch, never read a bedtime story. Eddie had been the one who was good with kids. Eddie was the one who could make Sophie laugh just by walking into a room. And Eddie was gone. And Rachel was gone. And all that was left was me and a little girl who didn't understand why everyone kept leaving. So one Saturday morning, I packed a bag with peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes and drove her to Good Harbor Beach. She didn't want to go. She cried in the truck the whole way there. When we got to the sand, she stood at the edge with her shoes on and her arms crossed and said, "I don't want to. That's okay." I said, "We'll just sit." So we sat. For an hour. I didn't push her. I didn't try to make her happy. I just sat beside her on the cold sand and let the waves do the talking. And after a while, she took off her shoes, then her socks. Then she stood up and walked to the water's edge and let the foam run over her toes. She turned around and looked at me. And she smiled. The first smile in 3 weeks. I took the picture on my phone. Printed it that night. It had been in this box ever since. I set the photo aside and picked up the next item. A piece of construction paper, yellowed and soft at the folds. Sophie's drawing from 3rd grade. A lighthouse. Drawn in thick crayon strokes. Blue and white, with a bright yellow beam reaching across the page. At the bottom, in her 8-year-old handwriting, she'd written, "The Lighthouse," by Sophie Callahan. It keeps people safe. Like my dad. I remembered the evening she brought it home. She walked into the kitchen where I was frying fish and held it up with both hands like she was presenting a masterpiece. "We had to draw something that makes us feel safe," she said. "And you picked a lighthouse?" "Because it stays," she said. "Even when the storm comes, it just stays and keeps the light on." I'd put it on the refrigerator. It stayed there for 3 years until the tape gave out and it fell behind the counter. I found it during spring cleaning and put it in the box. Beneath the drawing was a bracelet. Braided rope, the kind we used on the dock lines at Callahan Marine. Thick, rough, clumsy knots tied by small fingers that hadn't quite figured out the pattern. A piece of masking tape served as the clasp, and on it she'd written in purple marker, "Happy Father's Day, Dad. You're the best dad in the whole ocean." She was 12. She'd made it during the summer she spent at the shop with me every day because I couldn't afford a babysitter and didn't trust anyone else to watch her. She'd sit on an overturned bucket near my workbench, legs swinging, asking me the names of every tool. She learned to tie a bowline that summer, a cleat hitch, a figure 8, and apparently a bracelet. I'd worn it for 2 years until the rope started fraying. Then I put it here, where nothing could fray it further. Underneath the bracelet was a document. Folded once, creased deep from handling. Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Probate and Family Court. Certificate of Guardianship. Frank Thomas Callahan is hereby appointed legal guardian of Sophie Marie Callahan, formerly Sophie Marie Morgan. The name change had been Sophie's idea. She was 9 years old. She walked into my study one evening and said, "I want your last name." "Why?" I asked. "Because Morgan is her name," she said. She never called Rachel Mom back then. Just her. "Callahan is yours. And I'm yours." I filed the paperwork the next month. The judge asked Sophie if this was what she wanted. She looked at him and said, "He's the dad who stays. That's the realest kind. The realest kind." She'd said that when she was 9. And now, at 30, she'd stood in her doorway and told me I wasn't her real family. I wondered which version of Sophie was telling the truth. The 9-year-old who chose my name, Or the 30-year-old who'd been listening to Rachel Morgan for 2 months? I set the guardianship paper down and reached for the last item at the bottom of the box. An envelope. Old, slightly wrinkled, sealed. On the front, in handwriting I'd recognize anywhere, the same handwriting that used to label bait boxes and sign repair invoices and scrawl grocery lists on the back of napkins. Eddie Morgan had written 5 words. For Sophie. When she's ready. He'd given me this letter the morning of his last trip, handed it to me on the dock while the crew was loading ice and fuel. Just in case, he said, and grinned like it was nothing. Like it was a joke. Like the ocean couldn't possibly take a man who smiled that wide. I'd kept this letter for 25 years. I'd told myself Sophie wasn't ready. That she was too young, then too busy, then too happy to be burdened with words from a dead man. But sitting here in the dark with her voice still ringing in my head, I wondered if the truth was simpler than that. Maybe she'd been ready for years. Maybe I was the one who wasn't ready to let her read what Eddie had written about me. Because whatever was in that envelope, it was the last thing Eddie Morgan ever said. And I was terrified it would confirm what Rachel was telling Sophie. That I was never the father. Just the man who couldn't let go. I set the letter down on the desk, unopened. I wasn't ready tonight. But I knew I'd have to be soon. I looked at the window. The lighthouse beam swept across the dark water. On. Off. On. Off. Steady. Patient. A light that didn't care if anyone was watching. It just kept shining because that's what lighthouses do. I closed the box, picked up the letter, and held it against my chest. I stayed, Eddie. I whispered. I don't know if that was enough, but I stayed. I set the letter down on the desk and looked out the window. The ocean was black. No moon tonight. Just the rhythmic sweep of the Eastern Point Lighthouse cutting through the dark like a slow heartbeat. On, off, on, off. The beam reminded me of searchlights. Coast Guard searchlights. The kind that rake across open water when someone is missing. I didn't want to go back to that night. I never wanted to go back. But Rachel had cracked open the door with those words she'd fed Sophie. And now the memory was pushing through whether I wanted it or not. November 17th. 25 years ago. Eddie Morgan and I took his 32-foot trawler, the Mary Ellen, out for a late-season run off the coast of Rockport. The forecast said 15-knot winds, nothing unusual for November in the North Atlantic. We'd fished in worse. Eddie joked about it on the dock that morning, tossing coiled rope into the stern while the crew loaded bait and ice. "You worry too much, Frankie," he said, grinning that grin of his. The one that made you believe nothing bad could happen to a man who smiled like that. The ocean loves us. The ocean doesn't love anybody, I told him. It just tolerates us. He laughed. Then he handed me the envelope. Casual, like it was an afterthought. "Give this to Sophie, if anything happens. Just in case." He winked. "Not that anything will." I shoved it in my jacket pocket and forgot about it. We left the harbor at 4 in the morning. By noon, the sky had changed. The forecast had been wrong. Not 15 knots. Not 20. The wind came from the northeast at 45. And the swells rose from 6 feet to 15 in under an hour. The Mary Ellen was a good boat. Solid hull. Reliable engine. But she wasn't built for that kind of sea. I was at the helm when the first big wave hit. It came from the side. A wall of black water that slammed the boat hard enough to throw me against the console. The engine sputtered. The deck tilted. Everything that wasn't tied down went sliding. Eddie was at the stern securing the nets. I heard him shout something, but the wind tore his words away. I turned just in time to see the second wave. It was bigger than the first. Much bigger. It rose behind the boat like a living thing, dark and silent, for one terrible second before it broke. The sound was like a building collapsing. The stern dropped, the bow lurched upward, and Eddie went into the water. I don't remember grabbing the rope. I don't remember tying it to the cleat. I just remember being on my stomach at the edge of the deck with my arm in the water up to my shoulder and Eddie's hand in mine. His fingers were cold. His eyes were wide. The water was pulling him like it had made a decision and wasn't going to change its mind. "Hold on," I shouted. "Eddie, hold on." He tried. I could feel him gripping, his fingers digging into my wrist. But the ocean was stronger than both of us. The next swell lifted the boat and dropped it, and the force wrenched his hand out of mine. I felt his fingers slip. One by one. Pinky first. Then ring. Then middle. Then he was gone. I screamed his name until my throat tore. I screamed it into the wind and the waves and the black water that had swallowed him whole. The Coast Guard found me 2 hours later, hypothermic, clinging to the helm, still calling for a man the ocean had already taken. They never recovered his body. The sea kept him. It keeps what it takes. The funeral was on a Tuesday. All of Gloucester came. Fishing captains and dock workers and shopkeepers and school teachers, standing in the rain outside Our Lady of Good Voyage, the church on the hill that overlooks the harbor. They lowered an empty casket into the ground because there was nothing else to lower. Sophie stood beside me. She was 5 years old and wearing a black dress I'd bought the day before at a shop in Rockport, because I didn't know where to buy children's funeral clothes in Gloucester. She held my hand and stared at the hole in the ground with a look no 5-year-old should ever have. "Where's Daddy?" she asked. I crouched down to her level. The rain was soaking through my suit. Her brown eyes, Eddie's eyes, looked at me with a trust I didn't deserve. "Daddy's with the ocean now, sweetheart," I said. He loved the ocean, and it took him home. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Will the ocean take you too?" "No," I told her. "I'm staying right here." 6 months later, Rachel left. It was a Wednesday in May. I came home from the shop and found her bags by the front door. Sophie was sitting on the porch steps, still in her school clothes, watching her mother load a sedan I'd never seen before. "I can't do this, Frank," Rachel said. She didn't look at me. She looked past me, at the harbor, at the ocean, at everything she blamed for taking her husband. "I can't live in this town where he died. I can't look at her and see his face every day. I need to go." "And Sophie?" I said. Rachel paused with her hand on the car door. For 1 second, I thought she'd change her mind. I thought the weight of what she was doing would hit her, and she'd drop the keys and walk back inside and be a mother. She got in the car. Sophie watched the taillights disappear down the street. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there on the porch steps with her hands in her lap and asked, "Where's Mommy going?" "She'll be back," I said. It was the only lie I ever told Sophie. That night, after Sophie fell asleep, I stood in her doorway and watched her breathe. Her small body curled under the quilt my mother had made. Her dark hair spread across the pillow. Eddie's daughter. Rachel's daughter. And now, somehow, mine. "I'll be both," I whispered. "I don't know how, but I'll be both." I went back to my study. The same study I was sitting in right now, 25 years later. With the same ocean outside, the same window, and the same lighthouse sweeping the same darkness. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed white in the dark room. I created a new document. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I thought about Sophie's voice in that doorway. "You're not my real family, Frank." I thought about Rachel's whisper. "That's guilt, baby, not love." I thought about Eddie's hand slipping out of mine. About the promise I made in Sophie's doorway. About 25 years of showing up. Every single day. Then I typed 3 words. Financial independence plan. I stared at them for a long time. Then I saved the document and closed the laptop. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing. Something had broken that morning. Something I'd spent 25 years building. And I wasn't sure it could ever be fixed. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was that I'd finally stopped carrying the weight alone. Tomorrow, I'd start cutting the net. Tonight, I sat in the dark with Eddie's letter in one hand and 25 years of silence pressing against my chest, and I let myself grieve. Not for Eddie. I'd grieved for him a long time ago, for the version of Sophie who'd looked at me once and said, "He's the dad who stays." That's the realest kind. I wondered if that girl was still in there somewhere, or if Rachel had already erased her. I was at my desk by 5:30 the next morning. Callahan Marine sat in a converted boathouse near the working end of the harbor, far from the tourist shops and art galleries of Rocky Neck. I'd bought the building 20 years ago when the business grew too big for my garage. It still smelled like the ocean, like wood shavings and diesel and salt. On most mornings, that smell felt like home. Today it just felt like a place where I happened to be. The harbor was still dark outside my window. A few dock lights reflected off the water in long yellow streaks. No boats moving yet. The gulls hadn't started. The whole town was asleep. And I was sitting in front of my computer with a document called Financial Independence Plan open on one side of the screen and my banking portal open on the other. 5 accounts. That's what 25 years of support looked like when you reduced it to a list on a screen. I clicked on the first one. Rent. $1,800 a month, withdrawn automatically on the first. I'd set it up 4 years ago when Sophie moved into the harbor apartment. She'd just graduated from veterinary school, loaded with debt, starting a new job at the Marine Animal Center. I'd told her not to worry about rent. I'd handle it until she found her footing. She found her footing. She just never told me to stop. I remembered the afternoon we'd moved her in. Nate drove the truck. Sophie directed traffic from the sidewalk, pointing where each box should go. I carried her bookshelf up 3 flights of stairs because it wouldn't fit in the elevator. That night, we sat on the floor of her empty living room eating takeout lobster rolls from the Gloucester house, and she said, "I can't believe I have my own place." "You've earned it," I said. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad." Dodd. Note Frank. I clicked Cancel Recurring Payment. A confirmation box appeared. "Are you sure? This action cannot be undone." I clicked Confirm. The second account. Car payment. $380 a month. I'd co-signed when Sophie's credit wasn't strong enough for the loan. A used Subaru Outback, practical for New England winters. I'd taught her to drive in the Callahan Marine parking lot when she was 16. She'd hit a trash can on the first try and cried. I told her trash cans were there for practice. Cancel. Confirm. The third account. Insurance. Health. Dental. Vision. $420 a month. She'd stayed on my company plan because it was better than what the animal center offered. I remembered the night she was 7 and spiked a fever of 104. I'd driven 40 minutes to the emergency room in Beverly, with her wrapped in a blanket in the back seat, burning hot and shivering. The doctor said it was just a bad flu. I stayed beside her bed all night, checking her forehead every 20 minutes. Cancel. Confirm. Phone bill. $80. I'd added her to my plan when she was 15, and I wanted her to be able to reach me anytime, anywhere. She used to call me every Sunday evening. Those calls stopped in January. Cancel. Confirm. Student loan contribution. $270 a month. I'd been helping her chip away at the remaining balance from veterinary school. She didn't know I'd also paid off a separate $12,000 balance 3 years ago. Took it from my retirement account. Never told her. Some sacrifices aren't meant to be counted. Cancel. Confirm. The screen refreshed. 5 recurring payments canceled. Estimated monthly savings. $2,950. Savings. The word sat wrong in my chest. I wasn't saving anything. I was cutting the net. Every fisherman in Gloucester knows that sometimes you have to cut a net loose to save the boat. You lose what's in the net. Everything you worked for. Everything you hauled up from the deep. But the boat survives. And if the boat survives, you can fish again tomorrow. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the numbers until they blurred. Then I opened my email and typed a message to Sophie's property management company. Please remove Frank Callahan as guarantor for Unit 312. Effective immediately. I read it twice, then hit send. At 6:15, the front door of the shop opened. I heard the familiar sound of keys dropping into the ceramic bowl on the front counter, the click of low heels on the hardwood floor, the rustle of a coat being hung on the hook by the door. Marge Delaney appeared in my doorway. 58 years old, gray hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, reading glasses perched on top of her head like a crown she'd forgotten she was wearing. She'd kept the books at Callahan Marine for 20 years. She knew every dollar this company made, and every dollar I'd spent on Sophie. "You're here early," she said. Couldn't sleep. She looked at me the way she looked at a ledger that didn't balance. Careful. Searching. What happened? I told her. Not all of it. Just enough. Rachel came back. Sophie said I wasn't her real family. I canceled the payments. Marge sat down slowly in the chair across from my desk. She was quiet for a long time. The harbor was waking up outside, engines starting, dock lines creaking, gulls beginning their morning argument over fish scraps. "My son Tyler called me toxic," she said finally. I looked up. In 20 years, Marge had never mentioned a son. 4 years ago, she continued. He was 26. Graduated from UMass. Got a job in Chicago. Stopped calling. When I asked why, he said, "I smothered him." Said I made him feel guilty for living his own life. She took off her glasses and cleaned them on her sleeve. 4 years of silence. No calls, no texts, no holidays. I'd send birthday cards, and they'd come back unopened. "What happened?" I asked. He called me from a hospital last spring. His girlfriend had left him. He'd lost his job. Had nothing and nobody. And the first word out of his mouth was, "Mom, I'm sorry." She put her glasses back on. "He's doing better now. We're rebuilding. Slowly. But the 4 years I spent waiting nearly killed me, Frank. I'd lie awake every night wondering what I'd done wrong." "Did you do anything wrong?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "I held on too tight. I kept score. I reminded him of every sacrifice." She looked at me directly. "But you didn't do that. You gave, because you loved her. That's different. Doesn't feel different right now." "No." She agreed. "It doesn't." She stood up and straightened her jacket. "Sometimes people need to hit bottom before they look up. You can't break their fall forever." "What if she doesn't look up?" Marge paused at the door. "Then at least you'll know you stopped breaking your own back to carry someone who didn't want to be held." She left. I sat alone with the harbor waking up around me and 5 canceled payments on my screen. The first of the month was 6 days away. Sophie would notice when the rent didn't clear, when the car payment bounced, when the insurance lapsed. 6 days. I'd built 25 years of safety nets around my daughter, and in 20 minutes, I'd cut every single one. But what I didn't expect was who would show up first and what she'd accuse me of. 6 days later, I heard the bell above the shop door ring at 7 in the morning. Nobody comes to a boat repair shop at 7 on a Tuesday unless something's broken. I was in the back workshop sanding the hull of a lobsterman's dory. The door flew open, and Sophie stood there, breathing hard, face flushed against the cold. Sweatpants. Unzipped jacket over a pajama top. Hair coming undone. She looked like she'd rolled out of bed and driven straight here. "What did you do?" she said. I set down the sandpaper. Behind her, Marge appeared in the doorway. I gave her a small nod, and she stepped back, closing the door. "My rent bounced," Sophie said. "The landlord called Thursday. I thought it was a bank error, so I called them. They said you canceled the transfer." "That's right. And my car payment. My insurance. My phone. All of it." "Yes. You can't just do that." After 25 years, you can't just cut me off like I'm nothing. You're not nothing, Sophie. You're 30 years old. You're a veterinarian, with a degree and a job. Adults pay their own bills. You've always helped me. Her voice cracked. You said you'd always be there. I said I'd always love you. And I will. But love doesn't mean funding your life while you stand in your doorway and tell me I'm not your family. She flinched. She remembered what she'd said. That's what this is about? Your feelings got hurt, so you're punishing me? This isn't punishment. Then what is it? It's a lesson, I said, about what it costs to throw away 25 years. Her chin lifted. I recognized that posture, the same one she'd had as a teenager when she was about to say something sharp. Mom told me the truth about why you stayed. She said you feel guilty about Dad's death. She said you couldn't save him that night. She said you held his hand and let go. The words hit me like a punch to the sternum. Not because they were true, but because the letting go, Eddie's fingers slipping from mine, was the one thing I'd never forgiven myself for, even though the ocean had made that decision. Not me. She said raising me was your way of paying off a debt, Sophie continued, pushing the words out before she lost nerve. Not love. Guilt. The workshop was silent. The half-sanded dory sat between us, waiting. Is that what you believe? I asked quietly. I don't know what I believe anymore. Then let me ask you something. In 25 years, did I ever tell you that you owed me anything? She didn't answer. Did I ever hold money over your head? Did I ever say you had to do what I say because I paid for your college? No. She whispered. Did I ever try to control who you dated? Where you worked? What you studied? No. Then why would you believe her? Why would you believe I raised you out of guilt when 25 years of every single day says otherwise? A tear slipped down her cheek. Because she's my mother, she said. And I wanted her to love me. The honesty of it nearly broke me. That was Rachel's weapon. Not lies, not money. Something simpler and more devastating. A daughter's hunger for a mother's love. The one thing I could never give Sophie. No matter how many nets I mended or faucets I fixed. I understand that, I said. And I meant it. Then why are you doing this? I looked at her for a long moment. The harbor was waking up outside. Somewhere, a boat engine turned over. Because I'm teaching you what it feels like to not be family. I said. You told me I wasn't yours. Now you get to find out what that actually means. She stood there trembling. I thought she might say sorry. I thought she might break down and tell me Rachel was wrong. Instead, she wiped her eyes, turned around, and walked out. The bell rang. Then, silence. Marge appeared a minute later. You okay? No, I said. But I will be. She nodded and quietly pulled the door shut. I went back to the dory, picked up the sandpaper, worked until noon without eating, without checking my phone, just the rhythm of wood under my hands. Stroke by stroke, the way you finish anything worth finishing. It wasn't until I stopped for water that I noticed the envelope on my desk. Marge must have brought it in while I was working. Certified letter. Return receipt. Requested. The letterhead read Gwen Pratt, Esquire, family law attorney. My stomach dropped. I opened it. The letter demanded immediate reinstatement of all financial support, citing established dependency and emotional distress caused by abrupt termination. It threatened legal action if I didn't comply within 10 business days. Sophie hadn't just been angry. She'd hired a lawyer. Or Rachel had hired one for her. I was still staring at the letter when my phone rang. Unknown number. Boston area code. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Instinct, maybe. Or the feeling that the ground was shifting faster than I could keep up. Mr. Callahan? A man's voice. Professional. Careful. My name is Douglas Whitfield. I'm a senior claims officer at New England Maritime Insurance. I need to speak with you about the Eddie Morgan Trust Fund. I gripped the phone tighter. Eddie's trust fund. The one I'd set up 25 years ago with his life insurance. $350,000. Held in trust for Sophie until her 30th birthday. This year, what about it? I said. Someone's been trying to access it, Mr. Callahan. And this isn't the first time. He paused. Can you come to my office in Boston? This conversation needs to happen in person. I stood in my workshop with a lawyer's threat in one hand and a phone call about Eddie's money in the other. Two doors had just opened at the same time, and I had a feeling they led to the same room. Tomorrow, I said. I'll be there tomorrow. I called Henry Zhao at 7 the next morning. He'd been my attorney for 15 years. A man who'd seen me through business disputes, contract negotiations, and one near bankruptcy during the recession of 2008. He was 65, sharp-eyed, deliberate in everything he did. The kind of lawyer who read a document 3 times before he said a word about it. I read him the letter from Gwen Pratt over the phone. When I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. She doesn't have a case, Henry said. Walk me through it. Sophie is 30 years old. She's a legal adult with a professional degree and steady employment. You have no legal obligation to support her. You're her guardian, not her adoptive parent. There's no written agreement, no court order, nothing binding you to continued financial assistance. What about the established dependency argument? Irrelevant, Henry said firmly. Adults are responsible for themselves. You could have paid every bill for 50 years. It still wouldn't create a legal obligation. Gwen Pratt knows this. She's throwing legal terms at you, hoping you'll write a check to make it go away. It almost worked, I admitted, but it didn't. I'll draft a response today. Polite, firm, unambiguous. He paused. Now, tell me about this insurance call. I told him about Whitfield. Henry was quiet again, longer this time. I'm coming with you to Boston, he said. We drove down together the next morning. Boston was 2 hours south on a good day, and the traffic cooperated for once. Henry used the drive to review the Gwen Pratt letter one more time, marking sections with a red pen while I kept my eyes on the highway and tried not to think about what Whitfield might tell us. New England Maritime Insurance occupied the 14th floor of a glass tower overlooking Boston Harbor. The waiting room smelled like carpet cleaner and money. Douglas Whitfield met us at the reception desk. He was in his mid-50s, silver-templed, wearing a navy suit that fit like it had been measured twice. He shook my hand with the grip of a man who delivered difficult news for a living and had learned to be steady about it. His office had floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the harbor. I could see fishing boats and cargo ships and the distant outline of Logan Airport. Whitfield gestured us toward a conference table in the corner and opened a leather portfolio. Let me start from the beginning, he said. Eddie Morgan purchased a life insurance policy through our company in October of 2000, approximately 1 month before his final voyage. The policy was valued at $350,000. I nodded. I knew this part. Eddie had told me about it on the dock the day he bought it. Just in case, he'd said, with that grin of his. Always. Just in case. Per the terms of the policy, Whitfield continued, the payout was placed into a trust fund. You, Mr. Callahan, were named executor. Sophie Marie Callahan was named sole beneficiary. The funds are to be released when the beneficiary reaches the age of 30, which is this year, Henry said. Correct. Sophie turns 30 in November. The disbursement is scheduled for that month. Whitfield folded his hands on the table. Which brings me to why I called you. He opened the portfolio and laid out 4 documents side by side. Letters, each on different stationery, each addressed to New England Maritime Insurance, each signed by the same person. Rachel Morgan has attempted to access this trust fund 4 times in the past 10 years, Whitfield said. I stared at the letters. 4 of them, lined up like evidence. The first attempt was in 2015, Whitfield said, pointing to the leftmost letter. She wrote to us claiming to be Sophie's mother and primary caregiver. She requested early disbursement on grounds of financial hardship. We denied it. She had no legal standing. He moved to the second letter. 2019. This time she went through an attorney in Tampa, Florida. The request cited medical expenses for Sophie, which were fabricated. We investigated, found no medical claims on file, and denied the request. The third letter. 2023. She contacted us directly by phone, identifying herself as Sophie Morgan's legal representative. When we asked for documentation, she couldn't provide any. We flagged her account and added a security note to the file. Whitfield pointed to the fourth letter. December 2024. 3 months ago, she sent a formal written request through another attorney, demanding release of the funds on the basis that she was Sophie's biological mother and entitled to manage her daughter's inheritance. We denied it. She was not a beneficiary, not a trustee, and had no power of attorney. Henry leaned forward. And 3 weeks after that denial, she contacted Sophie for the first time in 25 years. That's correct, Whitfield said. I pulled the timeline myself when Mr. Callahan called yesterday. Rachel Morgan's most recent denial was dated December 19th. Her first contact with Sophie, based on social media records we were able to verify, was January 8th, 20 days. Rachel had been denied access to $350,000, and 20 days later, she'd sent her first message to the daughter she'd abandoned a quarter-century ago. There's one more thing, Whitfield said. He slid a printed document across the table. A credit report. Rachel Morgan, formerly Rachel Thornton, currently residing in Tampa, Florida. Outstanding debt, $85,000. 2 collection agencies actively pursuing. 1 pending lawsuit from a failed business venture. A day spa that had gone under 18 months ago. I looked at the numbers. $85,000 in debt, $350,000 in a trust fund she couldn't touch, and a daughter she hadn't spoken to in 25 years who was about to turn 30. She's not here because she missed Sophie, I said. No. Whitfield agreed. She's here because $350,000 is about to be released, and she needs someone's name on the withdrawal form. Henry's voice was sharp. Does Sophie know about the trust fund? I have no indication that she does, Whitfield said. And based on Rachel Morgan's behavior, I suspect she hasn't told Sophie. If Sophie discovered the trust fund independently, she might ask questions Rachel can't answer. I sat back in my chair and stared at the 4 letters spread across the table. 4 attempts in 10 years. Each one calculated. Each one denied. And when the paperwork failed, Rachel had found another way in. Not through lawyers or letters. Through love. Through a daughter's desperate need for a mother who'd never earned the title. What do we do? I asked. Henry looked at Whitfield. Can you freeze the disbursement? Not without cause, Whitfield said. The trust terms are clear. Sophie receives the funds at 30. But if there's evidence of undue influence or coercion, I can petition the court for a delay. Then we need evidence, Henry said. He looked at me. We need someone close to Sophie. Someone who can tell us what Rachel is doing inside that apartment. I thought of Sophie standing in my workshop, shaking, repeating words that didn't sound like hers. I thought of Rachel's hand on her shoulder. That calculated whisper in the hallway. The 20 days between a denied letter and a reconnection that was never about love. I think I know where to start, I said. I called Nate from the truck on the drive back from Boston. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear the ocean behind him, the deep engine rumble of a fishing vessel, wind cutting across the microphone. He was on the water. I need to talk to you, I said. Tonight. My place. About Sophie, about everything. He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, I'll be there by 7. Nate Callahan. My son. Not through guardianship or circumstance, but through blood. He was 34 years old, broad-shouldered, windburned, with my jaw and his mother's eyes. I'd had him young, 29, during a brief marriage to a woman named Diane, who'd decided after 2 years that Gloucester was too small, and I was too steady. She moved to Portland, then Denver, then somewhere I stopped tracking. Nate stayed with me. He never once asked why his mother left. He just adapted the way children of fishermen do, by learning to read the weather and adjust the sails. He'd grown up alongside Sophie. They weren't blood siblings, but they'd shared a house for most of their childhood. Nate was 5 years older and had treated Sophie like a little sister from the moment I brought her home. He taught her to bait a hook. She taught him to draw lighthouses. They fought over the television remote and argued about whose turn it was to wash dishes. Normal stuff. Family stuff. When Sophie told me I wasn't her real family, Nate was the first person I'd wanted to call. But I hadn't. I needed to process it alone first. Now, I needed his help. He showed up at 6:45, still smelling like the ocean, his work boots leaving salt tracks on the kitchen floor. I poured 2 mugs of coffee, black for both of us, and we sat at the kitchen table the same way we'd sat 1,000 times before. Father and son, 2 men who'd rather fix things with their hands than talk about feelings. But tonight, we had to talk. I told him everything. Whitfield, the trust fund, the 4 denied letters, Rachel's debt, the 20-day timeline. Nate listened without interrupting, his jaw getting tighter with every detail. When I finished, he set down his mug and said what I'd already been thinking. She's not here for Sophie. She's here for the money. That's what Whitfield believes. Nate leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. I knew something was wrong the moment I heard she was back. You don't walk away from a 5-year-old and show up 25 years later because you had a change of heart. That's not how people work. You didn't say anything. You didn't ask. He looked at me directly. But I started watching anyway. I set down my coffee. What do you mean, watching? Nate pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and opened it. 2 weeks ago, I started checking Rachel's social media. She has a public Facebook page. Not much history, mostly inactive until this year. Then, starting in late January, she started posting. He turned the phone toward me. I saw the screen fill with posts, photo after photo, caption after caption. 15 posts in 6 weeks, Nate said, scrolling slowly. Every single one is about Sophie, reunited with my beautiful daughter, making up for lost time, blessed beyond words. The kind of stuff that gets 100 likes from strangers who don't know the backstory. He stopped scrolling on a photo of Rachel and Sophie at a restaurant, both smiling. The caption read, "Mother, daughter, date night. My heart is so full." Now here's the thing, Nate said. I cross-referenced the dates of her posts with what I know about Sophie's spending. How do you know about Sophie's spending? Because she still uses the family credit card for emergencies. The one linked to the business account. I have access to the statements through Callahan Marine's bookkeeping system. I hadn't thought to check that. Marge handled the statements. But Nate, who'd been helping with the books since he was 20, still had access. Every post Rachel makes lines up with a charge on Sophie's card, he said. He pointed to the restaurant photo. This one, February 22nd. Same night, there's a charge at the Beauport Hotel restaurant. $280. Sophie paid. He scrolled to the next post. Rachel at a spa. Captioned self-care day with my girl. March 3rd. A charge at a spa in Rockport. $400. Sophie paid. Another post. Rachel, holding shopping bags. March 10th. Nordstrom, $1,200. Sophie paid. I looked at the numbers. Every smile on Rachel's Facebook had a receipt attached to it. Every reunion photo was funded by the daughter she'd abandoned. There's more, Nate said. He swiped to a series of photos he'd taken himself. 3 images, slightly blurry, shot from across a street. Rachel and Sophie, walking into a building. The sign on the door read Gwen Pratt, Esquire, Family Law. I followed them. Nate said. 3 times in the past 2 weeks, Rachel has taken Sophie to that lawyer's office. 3 separate visits. Whatever Gwen Pratt is billing, I guarantee Sophie's paying for that too. I thought about the certified letter on my desk. Gwen Pratt's demand for reinstatement of financial support. Rachel hadn't just convinced Sophie to hire a lawyer. Rachel had walked her through the door herself. I also talked to people around town, Nate continued. Gloucester's small. People notice things. Mike Ferreira at the dock said Rachel's been asking questions about you. About Callahan Marine, about how much the business is worth. And Danny Souza at the Crow's Nest said Rachel mentioned something about Eddie's girl getting some money soon. He thought she was talking about a settlement. She's been asking about the trust fund. I said quietly. She's been advertising it. Nate put his phone down. Dad, she's not reconnecting with Sophie. She's building a case. Every Facebook post, every lawyer visit, every night she stays at that apartment, she's creating a paper trail that makes her look like a devoted mother who came back for love. And when that trust fund money drops in November, she'll be standing right there with her hand out. I stared at the phone on the table. 15 posts. Thousands of dollars in charges. 3 lawyer visits. And a town full of whispers that Rachel Morgan was already spending money she didn't have. Henry says we need evidence of undue influence, I said. Something that proves she's manipulating Sophie, not just reconnecting. Nate nodded slowly. There's one more thing. I talked to a girl named Olivia Santos. She lives next door to Sophie. Same floor, shares a wall. He paused. She's Sophie's best friend from high school. A nurse at Addison Gilbert. And she's been hearing things, Dad. What kind of things? The kind Rachel says when she thinks nobody's listening. Nate's jaw tightened. Olivia's been hearing her through the wall. Every night. Coaching Sophie. Telling her things about you. Things about Eddie. Things that aren't true. My hands tightened around the mug. Olivia wants to talk to you, Nate said. She's scared for Sophie. She says the girl she grew up with is disappearing. And someone needs to stop it before there's nothing left. Olivia Santos called me on a Wednesday night. It was past 9, and I was sitting in the kitchen with a plate of reheated chowder I hadn't touched, listening to the harbor wind rattle the window frames. When her name appeared on my phone, I didn't recognize it. Nate had given her my number that afternoon. Mr. Callahan? A young woman's voice. Nervous, but steady underneath the nerves. The kind of voice that had practiced staying calm in bad situations. A nurse's voice. This is Frank. My name is Olivia Santos. I'm Sophie's neighbor. Her friend. I need to tell you something. And it can't wait. I pushed the chowder aside and sat up straighter. Go ahead. Sophie's not okay. She said it fast, like she'd been holding the words in and they were pushing to get out. She hasn't been okay since Rachel showed up. She barely sleeps. She barely eats. She goes to work, comes home, and Rachel's there. Every single night. Sitting on the couch, talking. Always talking. What does she say? Olivia was quiet for a moment. I could hear her breathing. Could hear the faint sound of a television somewhere in the background. She was in her apartment. The apartment that shared a wall with Sophie's. She says you never loved Sophie, Olivia said. She says you kept Sophie because you felt guilty about Eddie's death. She says you used Sophie as a way to punish yourself, that raising her was your penance, not your choice. I closed my eyes. She says it over and over, Olivia continued, her voice dropping. Every night. Same words, same tone. Like she's reading from a script. And Sophie just sits there and listens. Sometimes she pushes back, says things like, but Dad paid for everything. Or Dad was always there. And Rachel always has an answer. She says, that's what controllers do. They buy your loyalty so you can never leave. The kitchen was silent except for the wind and the distant sound of a buoy bell in the harbor. "There's something else," Olivia said. "I've been recording her." "Recording?" "Through the wall. My living room shares a wall with Sophie's. The insulation in these old buildings is terrible. I can hear almost everything, if it's quiet enough on my side." She paused. "I know it sounds invasive, but Sophie is my best friend, Mr. Callahan. We've known each other since 10th grade. She's the one who pulled me through nursing school when I wanted to quit. She's the one who sat with me in the hospital parking lot during a panic attack and talked me down for 45 minutes until I could breathe again. I owe her more than I can ever repay, and what Rachel is doing to her isn't love. It's demolition." "Play it," I said. There was a rustling sound, then a click. The audio that came through my phone was muffled, distant, the kind of sound that's been filtered through plaster and old wood. But the voices were clear enough. Rachel's voice first. Calm, patient, almost soothing. The voice of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. "Frank never loved you, baby. He kept you because he couldn't live with what he did to your father. Every dollar he spent, every birthday he showed up to. That wasn't love. That was a man trying to buy his way out of guilt." A pause. Then Sophie's voice, smaller, uncertain. "But Dad paid for everything. My school, my apartment, my car. He didn't have to do any of that." "Exactly." Rachel's tone sharpened just slightly. A teacher correcting a student. "That's what controllers do. They make you dependent. They make you feel like you owe them, so you can never walk away. Real love doesn't come with a price tag, Sophie. Real love is free." "I don't know anymore." Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you want to be his puppet forever? Is that what you want?" The recording stopped. My hand was gripping the phone so hard the case was creaking. "There's more," Olivia said. "Last Thursday night, around 11, I heard Rachel on the phone. Not talking to Sophie, talking to someone else. Her voice was different, sharper, more businesslike. I pressed my ear against the wall and listened. What did she say? She was talking about money. She said, and I'm quoting this as closely as I can remember, "When that insurance money comes through, we'll be set. You and me, baby. We don't need Frank. We don't need anyone. Insurance money." She'd said it out loud. In Sophie's apartment, on the phone, thinking no one could hear. "And then," Olivia continued, her voice tightening, "she said something to whoever was on the other end. A man, I think. Or maybe a woman. I couldn't tell. She said, 'My daughter's about to come into money. I'll have your payment within 6 months. Just give me time.' A creditor. Rachel was promising Sophie's trust fund to a creditor. Money that hadn't even been released yet. Money Sophie didn't even know about. "Olivia," I said, "how is Sophie?" "Right now. Tonight." Olivia was quiet for a few seconds. When she spoke, her voice was thick. "She cries every night, Mr. Callahan. After Rachel goes to sleep on the couch, I hear Sophie in her bedroom. Sometimes it's quiet crying, the kind you do into a pillow. Sometimes it's the kind that shakes the walls." She took a breath. "But here's the thing that breaks my heart. Last week, I went over to borrow coffee. Rachel was in the shower. Sophie was sitting on the couch holding her phone, looking at old photos. Photos of you and her, the beach, the lighthouse, Christmases. She was scrolling through them one by one, real slow, like she was trying to memorize them." My throat tightened. She looked up at me and said, "Is Dad okay?" Just like that. "Not Frank. Dad." And I said, "He's hurting, Soph. He misses you." And her whole face crumpled. She started crying, and then we heard the shower stop. And Sophie wiped her face and put the phone away and said, "Don't tell Mom," I asked. I couldn't speak for a long moment. The buoy bell rang out in the harbor. On, off, on, off. "She's still in there, Mr. Callahan?" Olivia said softly. The real Sophie. The one who loves you. But Rachel is burying her. A little more. Every day. And if someone doesn't pull her out soon, I'm afraid there won't be anything left to save. Will you testify to this? I asked. If it comes to that, the recordings, what you've heard, what you've seen. Yes, Olivia said without hesitation. I'll bring every recording. I'll stand in front of a judge. I'll do whatever it takes. Why? Because Sophie saved my life once, she said. And now, it's my turn. After she hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time. The chowder was cold. The wind had stopped. The house was perfectly still, and all I could hear was Sophie's voice playing over and over in my head. Is Dad okay? Don't tell Mom, I asked. She was still in there. Buried under Rachel's words. Drowning in lies, but still reaching for the surface. I picked up my phone and called Nate. We need to move faster, I said. Rachel knows about the trust fund. She's already promising it to her creditors. And if Sophie signs anything before we can stop her, we lose everything. What do you need? Nate asked. Check the apartment. Sophie has classes on Tuesday nights. If Rachel's been leaving documents around, if there's a power of attorney, a financial form, anything with Sophie's name on it that Rachel's been pushing her to sign, I need to know about it. I still have my backup key, Nate said. Then use it. Nate called me Thursday morning at 6:15. I was already awake. I had not slept more than 3 hours in a row since that Saturday at Sophie's apartment. My body had learned to run on coffee and worry. I went in last night, Nate said. His voice was low, careful. Olivia confirmed Rachel left around 11. Sophie was asleep by 11:30. I used the backup key at midnight. I gripped the phone. What did you find? Dad, you need to come see this yourself. I drove to Nate's place in 20 minutes. He lived in a small house on Bass Avenue, 3 blocks from the water. The kitchen table was covered with photographs. He had taken them with his phone. Every image sharp. Every document legible. My son had learned precision from the sea. You measure twice on a boat because the ocean does not forgive mistakes. The first photograph showed a stack of papers on Sophie's kitchen counter, half hidden under a magazine. Nate had moved the magazine carefully and photographed each page. The top document was a power of attorney form. Rachel Morgan's name was printed in the agent line. Sophie's name was on the principal line. The signature space was empty. She hasn't signed, I said. My chest loosened 1 inch. Not yet, Nate said. But look at the next one. The second document was a trust distribution request form from New England Maritime Insurance. It asked for the full $350,000 to be transferred to a bank account at Coastal Commerce Bank in Tampa, Florida. The account holder was listed as Rachel Morgan. Not Sophie. Rachel. She's not even pretending. I whispered. The third photograph showed a handwritten letter from Rachel to Sophie. I recognized the slanted loops from 25 years ago. On the surface, it read like a mother's love note. But every paragraph contained a directive. The first paragraph praised Sophie for being brave enough to face the truth about Frank. The second explained that Eddie's insurance money was always meant for both of them, and that Frank had hidden it out of spite. The third urged Sophie to sign the power of attorney before Frank's lawyers could freeze the account. The fourth promised they would move to Tampa together and open a veterinary clinic near the beach. A veterinary clinic. Rachel had never held a job longer than 8 months. Henry Zhao had pulled her employment history. 14 jobs in 20 years. The longest was a receptionist position at a real estate office in Sarasota. 7 months and 12 days. Nate pointed to the fifth photograph. It was Sophie's Visa credit card statement. The balance was $11,400. 3 months ago, it had been under $2,000. I knew because I had helped Sophie set up that card when she turned 21. I had taught her to pay it off every month. She had been disciplined for 9 years. The charges told a story. February had 3 restaurant bills over $200 each. March had a spa visit for $400, a department store charge for $1,200, and a round-trip flight to Tampa for $680. April showed another flight, a hotel in Tampa for 3 nights, and a wire transfer fee of $45. She took Sophie to Tampa twice, Nate said. February and April. Same zip code as Rachel's last known address. I sat down. The photograph spread before me like evidence in a courtroom. I thought about Sophie sleeping in the next room while these documents waited for her signature. I thought about Rachel wearing down my daughter's resistance the way water wears down rock. There's one more thing, Nate said. He slid his phone across the table. On the screen was a photograph of Sophie's refrigerator door. Among the magnets and takeout menus, a small piece of paper was held by a whale-shaped magnet I had bought at the Gloucester Maritime Heritage Center when Sophie was 11. On it, Sophie had written 4 words in her own handwriting. Call Dad. Tell truth. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Her handwriting had not changed since college. Small, neat, slightly tilted to the right. She had written those words to herself when no one was watching. A reminder. A promise she had not yet kept. But she had written them, and that meant the Sophie I raised was still in there, somewhere behind the wall Rachel was building. She's not gone, I said. She's trapped. I called Henry Zhao from Nate's kitchen. I told him everything. The unsigned power of attorney, the trust distribution form listing Rachel's Tampa account, $11,000 in new credit card debt, 2 trips to Tampa, the handwritten letter full of directives. Henry was silent for 3 seconds. Frank, this is enough for an emergency injunction. I can file by tomorrow morning. We freeze the trust distribution until a judge reviews everything. Do it, I said. One more thing, Henry added. I checked with the Massachusetts Bar Association about Gwen Pratt. She was disciplined twice in 7 years. Once for misrepresenting a client's interests in real estate. Once for failing to disclose a conflict of interest in probate. She is not a clean attorney. I wrote that down. 2 disciplines. Real estate. Probate. Conflict of interest. Henry. Sophie wrote herself a note. 4 words. Call Dad. Tell truth. He paused. That shows volition, Frank. A judge will want to see that. After I hung up, Nate poured 2 cups of coffee. We sat in silence while the morning fog lifted off the harbor. The lighthouse beam had shut off at dawn, the way it always did. The light only runs when the world is dark. I looked at my son, 34 years old, steady as the tide. He had not asked me for anything. He had just seen the problem and moved toward it. She's my sister, Dad, he said. That's all the reason I need. I drove to the shop, unlocked the front door, and sat at my desk. The half-finished dory sat on its cradle, white oak ribs curving upward, like the bones of something waiting to be born. I opened my laptop and began typing a timeline. Every date, every dollar, every lie. Henry would give it to the judge. The light was coming. I just had to keep it burning long enough for Sophie to find her way back. Henry Zhao filed the emergency injunction at 9:14 on Friday morning, April 25th, 2025. I know the exact time because he called me from the Suffolk County Courthouse steps, and I wrote it on the corner of a napkin at Marge's kitchen table. She had made coffee and set out 2 blueberry muffins. I had not eaten one. It's done, Henry said. Judge Patricia Colburn. She reviewed the filing in chambers. The trust distribution is frozen effective immediately. No funds can be released from Eddie Morgan's policy until the court completes a full review of the evidence. I closed my eyes. $350,000, locked behind a judge's signature. Rachel could not touch it. Not today. Not next week. Not until a courtroom decided what was true. How long? I asked. Could be 60 days. Could be 90. Depends on how much they fight it. They'll fight it, I said. I know, Henry said. Which is why I also filed a motion to compel disclosure of all communications between Rachel Morgan and attorney Gwen Pratt regarding Sophie's trust. If Pratt was advising Rachel on how to access funds that belonged to Sophie, that's a conflict of interest and potentially fraud. I thanked him and hung up. Marge slid a muffin closer to me. I picked it up and ate half of it without tasting a thing. "You look like a man who just won a battle but knows the war isn't over," she said. "That's about right," I said. The response came faster than I expected. At 2:45 that same afternoon, Gwen Pratt called Henry Zhao directly. Henry recorded the call with her consent under Massachusetts two-party recording law. He played it for me that evening in his office on State Street. Pratt's voice was clipped, professional, and cold. She said the injunction was an overreach. She said Frank Callahan had no legal standing to interfere with Sophie's trust because Sophie was a 30-year-old adult capable of making her own financial decisions. She said the power of attorney was a standard estate planning document, and that Rachel Morgan, as Sophie's biological mother, had every right to assist her daughter in managing inherited assets. She demanded the injunction be lifted within 5 business days, or she would file a counter-motion accusing Frank of financial coercion and parental manipulation. Henry let the recording finish. Then he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "She made 3 mistakes in that call," he said. I waited. First, she acknowledged the power of attorney exists. We photographed it but had no official confirmation until now. Second, she called Rachel Sophie's biological mother, which means she knows Rachel abandoned Sophie at age 5 and has no custodial or legal parental relationship. Third, she threatened us with a counter-motion for financial coercion, which means she knows about the canceled payments. The only way she knows about those is if Rachel told her, which means Rachel and Pratt have been coordinating strategy. That is exactly the conflict of interest we alleged. I looked at Henry. He was 65 years old, thin as a fishing rod, with wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice that never rose above conversation level. In 30 years, I had never seen him smile during a legal matter. He was not smiling now, but there was something in his eyes that looked like satisfaction. "What happens next?" I asked. "We wait for the counter-motion. When it arrives, we respond with everything. The photographs from Sophie's apartment, the credit card statements, the trust distribution form listing Rachel's Tampa account, the 2 trips to Tampa, Rachel's employment history, her $85,000 in debt, Pratt's 2 prior bar disciplines, and the recording from Olivia Santos. The recording where Rachel says they'll be set when the insurance money comes through," I said. "That recording," Henry confirmed, "is the centerpiece. It proves Rachel's intent is personal financial gain, not parental concern." I drove home along the coast road. The sun was setting behind me, throwing long shadows across the pavement. The harbor was quiet. Most of the fishing boats were already docked, their rigging dark against the orange sky. I passed the entrance to Good Harbor Beach and remembered the photograph in the oak box. Sophie at 5 years old, smiling for the first time after Rachel left. That smile had cost me 3 weeks of patience, 4 failed attempts at pancakes, and 1 promise I made to a child who did not yet understand what forever meant. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the truck for a moment. The lighthouse was visible from my front yard, standing on the point like it always had. The beam would start at dusk. It would sweep the dark water in steady intervals, patient and reliable, asking nothing in return. My phone buzzed. A text from Nate. Olivia called. Sophie showed up at her door tonight, crying. Asked Olivia if she thought Frank still loved her. I read that message 3 times. Then I typed back 2 words. "Always has." Nate replied. Olivia told her the same thing. Sophie stayed for an hour. She didn't mention Rachel once. I sat in the truck and watched the lighthouse beam start its first sweep of the evening. 1 rotation every 15 seconds. I had counted it 1,000 times from this driveway. When Sophie was small, she used to sit on my shoulders and count with me. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, all the way to 15. Then the light would come back around, and she would clap her hands and say, "Again, Dad. Again." I went inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table with the manila folder. I opened it and added 2 new entries to the timeline. First, the injunction granted by Judge Patricia Colburn at 9:14. Second, Sophie crying at Olivia's door, asking if Frank still loved her. The first entry was evidence for a courtroom. The second was evidence for me. Both mattered. But only one told me my daughter was still fighting her way back to shore. Gwen Pratt filed her countermotion on Monday, April 28th. Henry Zhao received the documents by courier at 11 in the morning and called me before noon. "She's going aggressive," Henry said. 17 pages. "She's claiming you used financial control to isolate Sophie from her biological mother for 25 years. She's requesting the court lift the injunction immediately and award Sophie full access to the trust with Rachel Morgan, named as financial advisor." "Financial advisor," I repeated. That's the term she used. Not power of attorney. She changed the language. She knows we photographed the original document, so she's reframing Rachel's role as advisory rather than authoritative. It's a smart move, but it won't hold. Why not? Because the trust distribution form still lists Rachel's Tampa bank account as the destination. You don't send $350,000 to your advisor's personal checking account. That's not advisory. That's theft. Henry told me the hearing was scheduled for May 9th before Judge Colburn. We had 11 days to prepare our response. He asked me to come to his office Wednesday morning with every piece of evidence organized chronologically. I told him it was already done. I had been building that timeline since the night Nate brought the photographs to his kitchen table. I spent Tuesday at the shop. The dory was almost finished. I shaped the last 2 ribs with a hand plane and fitted them into the keel. The wood smelled like the forest and the sea at the same time. Cedar and salt. I worked slowly, measuring each joint twice before cutting. There is no rushing a boat. You build it right, or it sinks. There is no middle ground. Marge came in at 10 with 2 coffees and the morning mail. She set them on my desk and stood there, with her arms crossed. "You're too calm," she said. "I'm not calm, Marge. I'm focused." "Same thing with you," she said. "Tyler called me last night. First time in 3 months. Said he's been sober for 60 days. I looked up from the dory. "That's good news." "It's a start," she said. "He asked about you. I told him you were fighting for your daughter. He said he wished someone had fought that hard for him. I didn't answer. I just went back to the ribs and let the plane do its work." Wednesday morning, I arrived at Henry's office at 8:30 with the manila folder. It had grown thick. Henry spread everything across his conference table in chronological order. The photographs from Sophie's apartment, the credit card statements, the trust distribution form, Rachel's handwritten letter, the recording from Olivia Santos, Rachel's employment history, her $85,000 in debt, Gwen Pratt's 2 bar disciplines, the timeline I had typed on my laptop, and one printed photograph of a sticky note on a refrigerator door held by a whale-shaped magnet. 4 words. "Call Dad. Tell truth." Henry studied each piece for over an hour. He made notes on a yellow legal pad. When he finished, he removed his glasses and cleaned them with his tie. He only did that when he was thinking hard. "We have more than enough to defend the injunction," he said. "But I want to do more than defend. I want to file a counterclaim." "For what?" "Undue influence, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and tortious interference with a fiduciary relationship." He explained each one. Undue influence meant Rachel had used emotional manipulation to override Sophie's independent judgment. Financial exploitation meant she had targeted Sophie's trust fund for personal gain while Sophie was in a compromised emotional state. Tortious interference meant Rachel and Pratt had deliberately disrupted the trust arrangement that Eddie Morgan had established with Frank as executor. "If we win on all 3, Henry said, The court can permanently bar Rachel from any involvement with Sophie's financial affairs. And Pratt could face additional bar sanctions. What about Sophie? I asked. She's the one caught in the middle. Henry set down his glasses. Frank, I've known you for 30 years. You've never once asked me how to win. You always ask me how to protect someone. That's why I took this case for half my usual fee. I didn't know that. He had never mentioned it. Sophie will not be named as a defendant, he continued. She is the beneficiary and the victim. Everything we file protects her interests, not ours. The trust stays in her name. The money is hers. We're simply making sure no one steals it. I nodded. That was all I had ever wanted. Thursday evening, Nate called with an update from Olivia. Sophie had come to Olivia's apartment 3 times that week, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Each visit lasted longer than the one before. Monday was 40 minutes. Wednesday was an hour and a half. Thursday, she stayed for 2 hours and 20 minutes. She's talking more, Nate said. Olivia says Sophie asked about you again. She wanted to know if you still go to the shop every morning. If you still work on the boats. What did Olivia tell her? The truth. That you're there every day at 6. That you're building a dory. That you haven't missed a single morning. I closed my eyes. 25 years of mornings. 6 o'clock. Unlock the door. Turn on the lights. Start the coffee. Pick up the tools. Sophie knew that rhythm better than anyone. She used to come to the shop after school and do her homework on the workbench while I sanded hulls. She said the sound of sandpaper helped her concentrate. I never understood that, but I never questioned it either. Nate. When is the last time Olivia saw Rachel at Sophie's apartment? Tuesday night. But only for an hour. Sophie told Rachel she was tired and asked her to leave early. First time she's done that. An hour. Down from 4 and 5 hour visits. Sophie was closing the door, 1 inch at a time. The way you close a hatch on a boat when the storm is getting closer. Slowly, steadily, making sure the seal is tight. I marked the calendar on my wall. May 9th. The hearing. 12 days away. I picked up the hand plane and went back to the dory. The ribs were set. The planking would come next. 1 board at a time, bent to shape with steam. Fastened with copper rivets that would hold for 50 years. I knew how to build things that lasted. I had been doing it my whole life. May 9th fell on a Friday. I wore my only suit, a dark navy one I had bought for Sophie's college graduation 6 years earlier. It still fit. I had not gained or lost a pound since then. The sea keeps you honest that way. You carry what you carry, and the work burns the rest. Henry Zhao met me outside the Suffolk County Courthouse at 8:45. He carried a leather briefcase that looked older than both of us. Inside it was every piece of evidence we had gathered over the past 3 weeks. Photographs, credit card records, trust documents, employment histories, bar association reports, the recorded phone call from Gwen Pratt, and the recording Olivia Santos had made through the apartment wall. Are you ready? Henry asked. I've been ready since the morning she called me Frank instead of Dad, I said. We entered courtroom 4 on the 3rd floor. Judge Patricia Colburn presided from the bench, a woman in her late 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She had a reputation for being thorough, patient, and unmoved by theatrics. Henry said she was the best judge we could have drawn. Rachel Morgan sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. I had not seen her in 3 weeks. She wore a cream-colored blouse and pearl earrings. Her hair was freshly styled. She looked like a woman preparing for a church social, not a fraud hearing. Gwen Pratt sat beside her in a charcoal suit, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on a stack of papers. Sophie was not there. I looked for her the moment I walked in. The 2nd row, the 3rd row, the back of the room. Empty. She had not come. I did not know if that was a good sign or a bad one. Pratt spoke first. She presented Sophie as a competent adult who had reconnected with her biological mother after decades of separation. She described Frank Callahan as a well-meaning but controlling father figure who had used financial dependency to maintain authority over a grown woman. She argued that the emergency injunction was an overreach designed to punish Sophie for choosing to have a relationship with her mother. She requested the injunction be lifted and the trust released to Sophie immediately, with Rachel Morgan serving as an informal financial advisor. She spoke for 22 minutes. Her voice was smooth and practiced. She made no mention of the power of attorney. She made no mention of the trust distribution form listing Rachel's Tampa account. She made no mention of the 2 trips to Tampa or the $11,400 in credit card debt. She spoke only about a daughter's right to choose her own family. Henry stood when it was our turn. He spoke for 40 minutes. He began with Eddie Morgan. He told the court about the life insurance policy purchased in October of 2000, about Eddie's death at sea 1 month later, about the trust created to protect his daughter's future. He explained that Frank Callahan had been named executor because Eddie trusted him with his life and with his child. He established that Rachel Morgan had abandoned Sophie at age 5 and had made no attempt to contact her for 20 years. Then he presented the evidence. One by one. The power of attorney form, with Rachel's name in the agent line. The trust distribution form directing $350,000 to Rachel's personal account at Coastal Commerce Bank in Tampa. The handwritten letter coaching Sophie to sign before Frank's lawyers intervened. The credit card statements showing $11,400 in new charges, including 2 round-trip flights to Tampa. Rachel's employment history of 14 jobs in 20 years. Her $85,000 in personal debt. He played the recording from Olivia Santos. Rachel's voice filled the courtroom. When that insurance money comes through, we'll be set. The room went quiet. Pratt stared straight ahead. Rachel shifted in her chair. Then Henry played the recorded phone call, where Pratt had acknowledged the power of attorney, identified Rachel as Sophie's biological mother with no legal parental relationship, and threatened a counter-motion based on knowledge of Frank's canceled payments. Henry pointed out that Pratt's knowledge of those private financial details could only have come from coordination with Rachel, confirming the conflict of interest. Finally, Henry showed the photograph of Sophie's refrigerator door. The whale magnet. The sticky note. 4 words in Sophie's handwriting. Call Dad. Tell truth. Your Honor, Henry said. This is not a case about a daughter choosing her family. This is a case about a woman with $85,000 in debt who waited 20 years to contact her abandoned daughter, timed her return to coincide with a $350,000 trust maturation, and systematically manipulated that daughter into signing over her inheritance. The evidence is not ambiguous. It is arithmetic. Judge Colburn reviewed the materials for 15 minutes in silence. She asked Pratt 2 questions. First, why the trust distribution form listed Rachel's account and not Sophie's? Pratt said it was a clerical error. The judge asked the second question, why Rachel had contacted Sophie on January 8th, exactly 20 days after her 4th denied attempt to access the trust on December 19th. Pratt said it was a coincidence. Judge Colburn removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench. Counselor, she said to Pratt, in my experience, clerical errors do not come with handwritten coaching letters and rehearsed phone scripts, and coincidences do not align with 20-day intervals between denied financial claims and first contact with estranged children. She ruled from the bench. The injunction would remain in effect. The trust would stay frozen, pending a full investigation into undue influence and potential financial exploitation. She ordered Rachel Morgan to have no direct contact with Sophie regarding any financial matters until the investigation concluded. She referred Gwen Pratt to the Massachusetts Bar Association for review of her conduct in this case. Henry closed his briefcase. Across the aisle, Rachel Morgan stared at the table in front of her. She did not look at me. Gwen Pratt gathered her papers without speaking. I walked out of the courtroom into the May sunlight. Henry walked beside me. We did not speak until we reached the sidewalk. What happens now? I asked. The investigation runs its course. 60 to 90 days. Rachel is neutralized legally. Pratt will likely withdraw from the case within a week to protect herself. And Sophie, Henry stopped walking. That part is not up to the court, Frank. That part is up to her. I drove back to Gloucester alone. The highway was bright and open. I rolled down the window and let the salt air fill the truck. The hearing was over. The money was safe. Rachel could not touch it. But I was not thinking about money. I was thinking about an empty chair in the second row of a courtroom. Sophie had not come. She had not stood beside her mother. She had not stood beside me. She had stayed away. And I believed that meant she was making a choice she had not yet finished making. When I got home, I checked my phone. One text from Nate. "How did it go?" I typed back. The light held. 10 days passed after the hearing. I did not call Sophie. I did not text her. I did not drive past her apartment or ask Olivia for updates. Henry Zhao had advised me to maintain distance while the investigation was active, and I trusted Henry. But the real reason was simpler than legal strategy. I wanted Sophie to come back because she chose to, not because I pulled her. I went to the shop every morning at 6. I worked on the dory. The planking was going well. I had bent 12 boards with steam and fastened them to the ribs with copper rivets. Each plank overlapped the one below it. The way they have been built in New England for 200 years. Lapstrake construction. The old way. The strong way. Every joint sealed with cotton caulk and marine paint. Watertight. Marge came in every morning with coffee. She did not ask about Sophie. She talked about inventory, invoices, and the 3 boats scheduled for spring maintenance. She talked about Tyler, who had called her again. 70 days sober, he was attending meetings in Worcester and had started a part-time job at a hardware store. She said he sounded like himself for the first time in years. He asked if he could come visit next month, she said. "What did you tell him?" I told him the door was open. It always was. I understood that. I understood the open door and the patience it required to keep it that way. Some doors you hold open for years and nobody walks through, but you keep holding, because that is what the door is for. On Monday, May 19th, Nate sent me a short text at 7 in the evening. Olivia says Rachel packed 2 suitcases and left Sophie's apartment this afternoon. Took a cab to the bus station. I read the message twice. I set the phone down on the workbench. I picked up a piece of sandpaper and ran it along the gunnel of the dory. The wood was smooth under my hand. I did not reply to Nate for 10 minutes. When I did, I wrote only one word. Good. The next evening, Tuesday, I was sitting in the kitchen eating leftover chowder when I heard a knock on the front door. It was 8:20. The sun had just dropped below the tree line, and the sky was that particular shade of gray-blue that comes before the lighthouse turns on. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. Sophie stood on the porch. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt I recognized. It was mine. An old red and black plaid I had left at her apartment 2 years ago when I helped her move a bookshelf. She had kept it. She was wearing it now, buttoned to the collar. The sleeves rolled twice at the wrists because it was too long for her arms. Her eyes were red. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She held nothing in her hands. No phone, no purse, no folder of documents. Just herself, standing on the porch in my old shirt. "Hi, Dad," she said. She had not called me Dad since March. The word hit me in the chest like a wave breaking against a hull. I felt the wood groan and hold. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. She did not move. She stood on the porch with her arms at her sides and her chin trembling. I could see her trying to speak. The words were there, somewhere behind her teeth, but they would not come out. I had seen this before. When she was 7 and broke a window with a baseball. When she was 14 and failed her first exam. When she was 19 and called me at 2 in the morning from a party because her ride had been drinking. Every time she stood exactly like this. Arms down, chin trembling. Waiting for permission to fall apart, I stepped onto the porch and put my arms around her. She pressed her face into my shoulder and cried. Not the quiet kind. The kind that shakes your whole body. The kind that comes from a place so deep it does not have a name. I held her and said nothing. There was nothing to say yet. The saying would come later. Right now, the holding was enough. We stood like that for a long time. The lighthouse beam started its sweep behind us. I counted without thinking. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, all the way to 15. The light came around. Sophie did not clap her hands. She just held on tighter. When she finally pulled back, her face was wet and her breathing was uneven. She wiped her eyes with the flannel sleeve and looked at me. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I know, I said. She lied to me. About everything. About you. About Eddie. About the money. She told me you kept me out of guilt because you couldn't save him. She told me the insurance money was supposed to be for both of us. She told me you were controlling me with the apartment and the car and the payments. And I believed her because I wanted a mother so badly that I would have believed anything. Her voice cracked on the word mother. She pressed her lips together and looked at the floor. I found out about the bank account, she continued. The Tampa account. Olivia showed me the court documents after the hearing. I saw the trust distribution form with her name on it. Not mine, hers. $350,000 going straight to her checking account. She was going to take everything Eddie left for me and disappear again. I did not speak. I let her say it all. I told her to leave on Monday. She argued for an hour. She said the court was wrong, that you had manipulated the judge, that Henry Zhao was corrupt. I told her I had seen the documents myself. She stopped arguing after that. She packed 2 suitcases and called a cab. She didn't say goodbye. She just left. The same way she left 25 years ago. Sophie looked up at me. I wrote that note on the fridge weeks ago. Call Dad. Tell truth. I wrote it the night after I went to Olivia's apartment for the first time. I knew something was wrong. Dad, I knew it in my bones, but she was in my ear every single day. And her voice was louder than mine. I took her hand. It was cold. Your voice is loud enough, Sophie. It always was. You just needed the room to hear it. She squeezed my hand. We went inside. I heated the rest of the chowder and set a bowl in front of her. She ate slowly, the way she used to eat after long days at the shop. I sat across from her and watched the color come back to her face. 1 spoonful at a time. We did not talk about lawyers or judges or money. We talked about the dory. I told her about the planking, the copper rivets, the cedar ribs. She asked if she could come see it tomorrow. I said the shop opened at 6. I remember, she said. And she almost smiled. Sophie came to the shop at 6:12 on Wednesday morning. I knew the exact time because I heard her truck pull into the gravel lot while I was measuring a plank. The engine had a slight knock in the 3rd cylinder. I had been meaning to fix it for months. Some things you keep putting off because they give you an excuse to stay connected. She walked through the side door the way she always used to, without knocking. She wore work boots, old jeans, and a sweatshirt from the University of Massachusetts. Her hair was tied back. She carried 2 coffees from Harbor Roast, the place on Main Street where she had worked summers during high school. She set one on my workbench without a word and stood beside the dory. She's beautiful, Sophie said. She's almost done, I said. 12 planks set. 4 more to go. Sophie ran her hand along the hull the way I had taught her when she was 10. Fingertips first, then the flat of the palm, feeling for bumps, ridges, anything that would catch water wrong. Her hand moved slowly from bow to stern. She did not find a single flaw. You taught me how to do this, she said. I was in 5th grade. You told me a boat talks to your hands before it talks to the water. You remembered that. I remembered everything, Dad. We drank our coffees in silence. The shop was quiet, except for the gulls outside, and the distant sound of a lobster boat heading out through the channel. Morning light came through the east windows and laid long rectangles across the floor. Sawdust floated in the beams like tiny gold flakes. I handed her a piece of sandpaper. 120 grit. She took it without asking what to do. She started at the bow and worked her way aft, sanding with the grain in long, even strokes. Her technique was perfect. Muscle memory from 1,000 afternoons in this shop. Doing homework on the workbench, while I built and repaired boats around her. Marge arrived at 8. She stopped in the doorway when she saw Sophie. She did not say anything dramatic. She did not cry or gasp or make a scene. She walked over, set her coffee on the desk, and hugged Sophie the way you hug someone who has come home from a long trip. One arm around the shoulder, one hand on the back of the head. Brief and warm. "Good to see you, honey," Marge said. "Good to be here, Marge," Sophie said. Marge looked at me. I gave her a small nod. She went to her desk and started on the invoices. The shop returned to its rhythm. 3 people working in the same space, each doing their own task, connected by proximity and silence. That was how it had always been. Sophie sanded for 2 hours straight. At 10, she set down the paper and flexed her fingers. "Dad, I need to tell you something." I set down my plane. "Go ahead. I want to meet with Henry Zhao. I want to give a formal statement about everything Rachel did. The letters, the coaching, the credit card spending, the Tampa trips. All of it. I want it on the record. Not because you need it for the case, because I need it for myself." I looked at my daughter. She was standing in the middle of my shop, covered in sawdust, her hands raw from sanding, her eyes clear for the first time in months. She was not asking for permission. She was telling me a decision she had already made. "I'll call Henry today," I said. "There's something else," she said. "I don't want the trust money. I did not expect that." "Sophie, that money is yours. Eddie left it for you." "I know. And I've been thinking about it since Monday. $350,000. Rachel came back for it. She built an entire lie around it. She turned me against the only father I've ever known because of it. That money brought out the worst in someone I wanted to love. I don't want it to do the same to me. What do you want to do with it?" She looked at the dory. She touched one of the copper rivets with her fingertip. "I want to create a fund. A scholarship fund for kids who grew up the way I did. Kids who lost their parents, or whose parents left, or who ended up with someone else's family and wondered every day if they were really wanted. I want to give them what you gave me. Not money. A chance." I could not speak for a moment. I turned away and picked up the hand plane. I ran it along a plank that did not need planing. The blade whispered against the wood. "Eddie would have liked that," I said. "I know," she said. "That's why I want to name it after him. The Eddie Morgan Second Chance Fund." Marge had stopped typing. I could feel her listening from across the shop. Nobody moved for a few seconds. "There's one more thing," Sophie said. "I want you to help me run it. Not because I can't do it alone. Because it should come from both of us. You and me. The way everything good in my life has come from both of us." I set the plane down. I looked at her. She looked back at me with steady eyes. She was not the girl who had called me Frank in her apartment doorway 2 months ago. She was not the girl who had repeated her mother's lies about guilt and debt. She was Sophie Callahan, 30 years old, standing in her father's shop, deciding what kind of person she wanted to be. "Okay," I said. "We'll build it together." She smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen from her since that Saturday morning in March, when I showed up with my toolbox. It reached her eyes the way light reaches the bottom of clear water, all the way through. We went back to work. Sophie picked up the sandpaper. I picked up the plane. Marge resumed the invoices. The shop filled with the sound of wood being shaped by patient hands. Outside, the harbor sparkled under the May sun. A fishing boat passed the breakwater, heading for open ocean. The lighthouse stood on the point, dark and quiet in the daylight, saving its light for when it would be needed again. Sophie gave her formal statement at Henry Zhao's office on Friday, May 23rd. I drove her to Boston that morning. She sat in the passenger seat of my truck and watched the coastline pass without speaking for the first 20 minutes. Then she turned to me. "Dad, I need to do this alone." In the room. Just me and Henry. I kept my eyes on the road. "I understand. It's not that I don't want you there. It's that I need to say some things that will be hard for you to hear. And if I see your face while I'm saying them, I might stop." I nodded. She was right. There are things a person needs to say in a room without the people they love watching them say it. Confession is easier when the witness is a stranger. I had learned that on the water. You tell the ocean things you would never tell the shore. Henry's office was on the 4th floor of an old brick building on State Street. The elevator was slow. Sophie pressed the button and stared at the doors. I stood beside her and said nothing. When we reached the 4th floor, Henry was waiting in the hallway. He shook Sophie's hand the way he shook everyone's hand, firm and brief, no warmth and no coldness, just respect. "Miss Callahan, thank you for coming," he said. "This will be recorded with your consent. Everything you say will be part of the official filing with Judge Colburn's court." Sophie signed the consent form. She looked at me one more time. "I'll be in the waiting room," I said. She went inside. Henry closed the door. I sat in a leather chair next to a table with old copies of the Boston Globe and a small potted plant that needed water. I picked up a newspaper from February and read the same paragraph 4 times without absorbing a word. She was in there for 2 hours and 40 minutes. I counted every minute because the clock on the wall was the only thing in the room that moved. At 11:52, the door opened. Sophie came out first. Her eyes were red, but her posture was straight. She had a tissue in her left hand, and her right hand was steady. Henry came out behind her, holding a yellow legal pad covered with notes. "Mr. Callahan," Henry said, "your daughter has provided one of the most detailed and compelling victim statements I have reviewed in 30 years of practice. I will incorporate this into our filing on Monday." Sophie walked past me and pressed the elevator button. I thanked Henry and followed her. We rode down in silence. In the truck, she buckled her seatbelt and stared out the windshield. "She started calling me in January," Sophie said. "January 8th. I remember because it was a Wednesday, and I had just finished a night shift at the clinic. I was exhausted. She sent a Facebook message first, then a phone call. Her voice sounded exactly the way I had imagined it my entire life. Warm. Soft. Like a mother. I started the truck, but did not pull out of the parking space. She said she had been looking for me for years. She said she left because she was young and scared, and didn't know how to be a mother. She said she regretted it every single day, and I believed her, Dad, because I had spent 20 years hoping someone would say exactly those words to me. Sophie pressed her palms flat against her knees. By February, she was calling every day. Sometimes twice. She would talk about our future together. The clinic in Tampa. The house near the beach. She made it sound like a fairy tale. And then she started talking about you. I gripped the steering wheel. She said you took me out of guilt. She said Eddie's death was your fault, and you raised me to pay off a debt you could never repay. She said the money was proof. That Eddie left $350,000 for me and you hid it, because giving me the money would mean admitting what you did. Sophie's voice was steady. She had practiced this. She had said these words once already in Henry's office, and saying them again was easier the second time. I understood that too. Repetition dulls the blade. I told Henry everything. The daily phone calls. The scripts she rehearsed with me before I confronted you at the shop. The credit card spending. She told me it was our money, that you owed us, and that spending it was justice. The Tampa trips. She took me to see the building where she wanted to open the clinic. It was a vacant storefront in a strip mall next to a nail salon. The windows were dirty. There were weeds growing through the sidewalk, but she described it like it was already real. She had brochures printed. She had a business plan in a binder. She had everything except the $312 and $50,000. Sophie turned to face me. I told Henry about the night I wrote that note on the fridge. It was after the second Tampa trip. We flew back on a Sunday. Rachel dropped me off and said she would come by Monday to go over the trust paperwork. I went inside and sat on my kitchen floor for an hour. Something was wrong. I could feel it the way you feel. A shift in the current before you see it. The storefront was too small. The brochures looked cheap. The business plan had numbers that didn't add up, and she had never once asked me what I wanted. Not once in 4 months. She only talked about what we were going to do with the money. She paused. I wrote the note at midnight. Call Dad. Tell truth. I put it on the fridge where I would see it every morning. But every morning Rachel called at 8, and by 8:15 the note disappeared behind her voice. I saw it every day, and I couldn't reach it. I finally spoke. You reached it, Sophie. You're here. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the seat. I also told Henry something I haven't told you. Rachel asked me to sign a second document. Not just the power of attorney. She had a form that would add her name to my bank account as a joint holder. She brought it on the last night before I told her to leave. I refused. That was the first time I said no to her. She got angry. She said I was ungrateful. Just like you. She said I would end up alone. Just like you. Sophie opened her eyes and looked at me. That was the moment I knew. Because you are a lot of things, Dad. But you have never been alone. You have Nate and Marge and Henry and the shop and this town and every boat you've ever built. And you had me. For 25 years you had me. And I was the one who left. I pulled out of the parking space. We drove north along the coast road. The ocean was flat and bright under the noon sun. We stopped at a clam shack in Essex and ordered 2 plates of fried clams and coleslaw. We ate at a picnic table near the water. Sophie ate everything on her plate. She had not done that in months. On the drive home, she fell asleep with her head against the window. I drove slowly, taking the long way through Rockport and around the Cape. I was not in a hurry. My daughter was sleeping in my truck, wearing my old flannel shirt over her sweatshirt. And the road home was long and beautiful, and ours. The investigation concluded on August 15th. Henry Zhao called me at the shop with the results. Judge Colburn had reviewed Sophie's statement, the financial evidence, the recordings, and Pratt's disciplinary history. She issued a final ruling. The trust fund was released to Sophie Callahan as sole beneficiary. Rachel Morgan was permanently barred from any involvement in Sophie's financial affairs. Gwen Pratt received a formal censure from the Massachusetts Bar Association and voluntarily surrendered her license rather than face a full disciplinary hearing. Rachel did not contest the ruling. Henry said she had returned to Tampa in late May and had not responded to any court communications since June. She simply disappeared, the way she had disappeared 25 years ago. Quietly. Completely. Without a forwarding address. Some people leave like that. They walk out of your life the same way they walk out of a room. No goodbye. No door closing. Just silence where a person used to be. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel relieved. I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes after a long season on the water, when the boat is finally docked and the nets are hung and your body realizes it has been running on something other than rest for months. I sat on the stool beside the dory and looked at the finished hull. Every plank in place. Every rivet set. Every seam sealed. She was ready for the water. Sophie filed the paperwork for the Eddie Morgan Second Chance Fund in September. She worked with a nonprofit attorney in Gloucester named Martin Cross who donated his time after hearing the story. The fund was structured as a scholarship program for young people who had aged out of foster care or lost their primary caregivers before the age of 18. It would cover tuition, books, housing, and a monthly stipend for living expenses. The first awards would be granted in January of the following year. Sophie asked me to sit on the board of directors. I told her I did not know anything about running a nonprofit. She said I knew everything about raising someone who had nowhere else to go, and that was the only qualification that mattered. I agreed. Nate helped build the fund's website. He did not know much about computers, but he knew a young woman named Kayla Briggs, at the Gloucester Public Library, who designed websites as a side project. Kayla was 22 years old and had aged out of the foster care system at 18. She had put herself through community college, working 2 jobs. When Sophie told her about the fund, Kayla sat in the library conference room and did not speak for a full minute. Then she said, "Where was this when I needed it?" Sophie told her it was here now. And that was what mattered. Kayla became the fund's first scholarship recipient. She enrolled at Salem State University in the fall to study social work. Sophie wrote her recommendation letter. I did not read it, but Sophie told me the last line said, "She reminds me of the person I would have become without my father, and she deserves the same chance he gave me." Marge donated the fund's first $1,000 from her personal savings. She said it was Tyler's idea. Tyler had been sober for 150 days. He was still in Worcester, still working at the hardware store, still attending meetings. He called Marge every Sunday evening at 7. She said the calls were short but steady, like a pulse. The dory launched on the first Saturday of October. We put her in the water at Lane's Cove on a clear morning with no wind. Sophie, Nate, Marge, and I carried her down the boat ramp and set her in the harbor. She floated perfectly. Not a single leak. The hull sat in the water like it had been born there. The copper rivets catching the morning sun. The cedar planks dark and smooth below the waterline. Sophie had painted the name on the transom the night before. She would not let me see it until the launch. When we turned the dory around at the water's edge, I read the name in dark blue letters against the white paint. Second chance. I looked at Sophie. She looked at me. Neither of us spoke. There are moments that do not need language. They just need 2 people standing in the same place, looking at the same thing, understanding what it means without having to explain. We rowed the dory out past the breakwater. Sophie took the oars first. Her stroke was clean and even, the way I had taught her when she was 12 in a borrowed skiff on the Annisquam River. I sat in the stern and watched Gloucester grow smaller behind us. The harbor, the rooftops, the church steeple, the shop, and beyond everything, the lighthouse on the point, standing white and straight against the October sky. "Dad," Sophie said between strokes, "I want to tell you something I should have said a long time ago." "You don't have to," I said. "I know I don't have to. That's why I want to." She rested the oars and let the dory drift. The water was calm. The tide was slack. We sat in the middle of the harbor with nothing around us but ocean and sky. "Thank you for staying," she said. "When Eddie died and you could have walked away. When Rachel left and you could have sent me to the state. When I was 7 and wouldn't talk for a month. When I was 15 and told you I hated you because you wouldn't let me go to a concert. When I was 22 and changed my major for the 3rd time. And you just said okay. When I was 29 and called you Frank and told you that you weren't my family. You stayed every single time. And I need you to know that I know what that cost you." I looked at the water. The sun made small bright points on the surface that appeared and disappeared like memories. "It didn't cost me anything, Sophie. It was never a cost. It was the only thing I ever wanted to do." She picked up the oars and rowed us back to shore. We tied the dory to the dock and walked up the ramp together. Nate was waiting with a thermos of coffee. Marge had brought sandwiches. We sat on the stone wall above Lane's Cove and ate lunch while the dory rocked gently in the harbor below. That evening I stood in my front yard and watched the lighthouse come on. The beams swept the dark water in its steady rhythm. 15 seconds. One rotation, then another, then another. It does not stop. It does not ask who is watching. It does not care whether anyone is lost or found. It simply keeps the light burning because that is what it was built to do. I went inside. The house was quiet. On the kitchen table was a small package wrapped in brown paper. Sophie had left it while I was outside. I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a wooden frame, hand-carved, with a photograph. The photograph showed a man and a little girl standing on the dock at Lane's Cove. The man was holding the girl on his hip. She was pointing at something out on the water, her mouth open in a wide laugh. On the back of the frame, in Sophie's handwriting, were 5 words. You kept the light on. I set the frame on the kitchen table where I could see it from every chair. Then I turned off the lamp and sat in the dark, listening to the ocean through the open window. The lighthouse beam swept past the house every 15 seconds, painting a thin line of white across the ceiling. I counted without thinking. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, all the way to 15. The light came back around. It always does.